Hello and welcome to the FollowInTruth podcast, a podcast dedicated to sharing the truth about what the Bible really says. I'm your host, LJ. The title of this episode is there a contradiction in the Bible with the timing of the census of Quirinius? A contradiction that is sometimes cited, although relatively rarely in comparison to many others, by those that claim that the Bible has errors, is the dating of the birth of Jesus' narrative as found in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. Matthew has the birth of Jesus occurring during the reign of King Herod the Great. Matthew 2:1. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. However, Luke dates the birth of Jesus as having been after, or at least at the time of, the census of Quirinius. Luke 2:1. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus, that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Quirinius was governor of Syria. To many, the contradiction is not immediately evident, and this is probably why it is only sometimes used. It is, I would say, a rather more advanced contradiction. So what is the contradiction? There is a gap between these two events. Josephus dates Quirinius as governor of Syria and the census to 6 to 7 AD. The account of Josephus can be found in Antiquities of the Jews, Book 18, Chapter 1. This census conducted by Quirinius was well known. It is an event that most Jews would be able to pinpoint with accuracy the date to which it occurred. The events that surrounded it would be a contributing factor of events that would lead to the eventual Jewish-Roman Wars of 70 AD. King Herod, on the other hand, died somewhere around the year 4 BC. For much of historical times, Herod was believed to have died in 1 BC. However, Emil Schurer, a German scholar, argued that this date should have been 4 BC. This actually became the accepted date for most of the 20th century. This has been challenged again in more recent scholarship, and many have taken the belief of the original understanding for the date of his death. Whichever date is the correct date of the death of Herod, what is certain, it was before the date of 6 AD. And so still poses a problem with the account of Luke that would date the birth of Christ at this time. It is my belief that the correct timing of the birth of Jesus can be dated to be around 4 to 1 BC, as attested to by Matthew in his Gospel with his reference to King Herod. What is often not cited in the claims against Luke is that Luke himself dates the birth of Jesus to the time of King Herod. Luke 3:1. Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip tetrarch of Iturea, and of the region of Trachonitis, and Lysanias the tetrarch of Abilene. Tiberius Caesar reigned after Caesar Augustus' death in 14 AD. Caesar Augustus reigned from 27 BC to 14 AD. The 15th year of the reign of Tiberius would therefore be around the year 28 to 29 AD. Luke says that at this time Jesus was about 30, Luke 3:23, and Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, which was the son of Heli. This again would date the birth of Jesus to approximately around 1 to 4 BC, this being the time of King Herod. Furthermore, if we go back to the first chapter of Luke, we will see that he also links the birth of Jesus literally with King Herod, when he tells of the birth of John the Baptist in the days of Herod, the king of Judea. Luke 1:5. There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias, and the course of Abia, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Elizabeth was the mother of John the Baptist. We know that John the Baptist was conceived 6 months before Jesus, as Luke also states that in the 6th month the angel came to Mary, Luke 1:26, and in the 6th month the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto a city of Galilee, named Nazareth. Mary went to visit Elizabeth, and the then yet unborn John, who leaped in Elizabeth's womb. Luke 1:39. And Mary arose in those days, and went into the hill country, with haste, into a city of Judah, and entered into the house of Zacharias, and saluted Elizabeth. And it came to pass, that when Elizabeth heard the salutation of Mary, the babe leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Ghost. Luke twice has Jesus being born before the time of the census of Quirinius. But we are still left with the problem of the timing of the census, which Luke links with Quirinius. And as per the attestation of Josephus, this happened at least 6 to 7 years later, maybe more, in 6 AD. We are left with this fact. If Luke really dated the birth of Jesus both to the same time as Matthew, around 4 to 1 BC, and also dated the birth to being after the census of Quirinius in 6 AD, that there isn't just a contradiction between Matthew and Luke, but Luke and Luke also. It would seem Luke contradicts himself by having Jesus being born at 2 different times. It is obviously impossible that Jesus could have been born around both dates. It must be noted that Josephus is the only source available for dating the census of Quirinius to 6 AD. What is often overlooked is that although the Bible, being a religious writing, it is also a historical one, and so should be viewed as such. If Luke does in fact disagree with Josephus and dates the census at a different time than Josephus, it would have to be proved that Josephus was in fact correct with his timing, just as much as it would have to be demonstrated that Luke was incorrect. It should not simply be taken that Luke is the one who is incorrect. I will, however, continue with the assumption that Josephus is correct in his dating of the census. So how do we reconcile the two clearly differential accounts together? There are in fact 2 ways, I think, in which we can resolve this apparent contradiction. The first, I believe, is the way in which Luke meant when he wrote his gospel. And the second, while it may stand alone, I rather believe that it is more likely to work alongside or complementary to the first. Number 1. There was more than one census of which Luke referred to. With this answer, like so many answers, word usage by the author or authors is key. The word first here would give the impression of more than one. Luke uses the word protos, which is translated as first in the vast majority of versions, such as the KJV, NIV, ESV, NASB, ASV, and the ERV, and many others. If there was only one census, and Luke knew of only one, then the language he used is rather strange and misplaced. Protos simply does not fit here in the Greek if one single census is in view. It is much more likely that Luke would indicate that this was the census when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Luke was likely indicating that this was numerically the first census, first of an unspecified number, but more than one. There is biblical evidence to show this word being used as such, translated to mean numerically first. The first day of the week, Mark 16:9. It is also translated as first in Acts 16:23. But obviously, if this was the first when Quirinius was governor of Syria, then this first census would still have been around 6 AD, as Quirinius didn't become governor of Syria until 6 AD. And so any further censuses would have occurred after the first, which must have taken place, as Josephus stated, in 6 AD. This clearly wouldn't resolve the alleged contradiction. But Luke could also have meant by his use of protos, first as in before. Luke, rather than simply in saying this was the numerically first, stating when Quirinius was governor of Syria, stating that the census was the first as in before when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Luke, therefore, using the well-known reference point of the census of Quirinius, which the Jews would be all too aware of, and saying the events of the birth, including the first census, were before the census when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Luke, not linking the census of the birth of Jesus to the census of Quirinius, but a census that came first, before this well-known point of reference. The reference to Quirinius would then simply become a time reference to which Theophilus could associate. The census Luke referred to as when Jesus was born, being before this census. Simply understood, the first census, the census that occurred when Jesus was born, was before the well-known reference point of the census of Quirinius in 6 AD. There is also biblical evidence to support protos, meaning exactly this. Luke himself uses the word to refer to his first book, the first book of two, the one that came before the one after. Luke, in his second book, referring to the first book numerically, that also came first in before the second. Acts 1:1. The former treatise have I made, O Theophilus, of all that Jesus began both to do and teach. In Hebrews there is a reference to the first covenant, the one that came before the one that came after. The first that again numerically was first, but also first as in before the second. Hebrews 8:7. For if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. We also have this being used in John 15:18, where Jesus says that the world hated him before, first, it hated the disciples. John 15:18. If the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. In all of these verses, protos is translated as before. Luke was well aware of the census of Quirinius in 6 AD. In fact, in the book of Acts, Luke himself makes reference to the infamous census of 6 AD that Josephus referred to. Acts 5:37. After this man rose up Judas of Galilee in the days of the taxing, and drew away much people after him. He also perished, and all, even as many as obeyed him, were dispersed. It is almost certain that the second census mentioned by Luke in Acts was the census attested to by Josephus, as both link this census to the uprising under Judas of Galilee, and not the census that he made mention to in his gospel at the time of the birth of Jesus, some 8 to 12 years prior. However, Luke is in no way linking the census he makes mention of here in Acts back to the census he made reference to in his Gospel. Luke clearly believes that these two censuses are different censuses. It is also possible that Luke used protos to refer to the importance of one over the other. John uses the word to refer to something that is before in the sense that it is more important. John the Baptist stating that Jesus is more important than he is in John 1:15. John bare witness of him, and cried, saying, This was he of whom I spake. He that cometh after me is preferred before me, for he was before me. And in John 1:30, This is of he whom I said, After me cometh a man which is preferred before me, for he was before me. Mark does the same by using it when Jesus is asked which commandment was the first of importance. Mark 12:28. And one of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, and perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, Which is the first commandment of all? Jesus replies that the first in the terms of importance was that the Lord our God is one Lord, in Mark 12:29. This understanding is supported by Luke's use of the Greek genomai, which means to become, translated in Luke 2:2 as took place. It is the exact same word that is used in John 1:14, where the word became flesh. Luke also used this word in the previous verse, Luke 2:1, when he referred to the decree of Caesar Augustus having came to pass, Luke 2:1. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Luke could therefore be making a contrast between the census of the time of the birth of Jesus being before the greater or the census that became more important due to the events that surrounded it, when Quirinius was governor of Syria, which Luke himself references separately than the lesser in importance census that Luke associated with the birth of Jesus. Luke's use of protos, therefore, can simply encompass all of these different meanings in one word. Now, the second possibility is Quirinius served as governor of Syria prior to 6 AD. As stated earlier, this option may well stand alone, or in fact, it could also work in conjunction with the first answer. When I say served as governor of Syria prior to 6 AD, I rather need to qualify exactly what I mean. As many will probably say, there is no actual evidence to support the claim that Quirinius served as governor of Syria prior to 6 AD. It is also not likely that one person would govern one province on more than one occasion. It must be noted that at present we do have a gap in the records of the governor of Syria from 4 to 1 BC. You only need to look at Wikipedia for the list of Roman governors of Syria to find this fact. It must also be noted that the province of Judea had been added to the province of Syria for purposes of the census, and so technically this would be classed as a new province of Syria that included new territory. Therefore, it is possible that Quirinius was in fact the governor that is not recorded, and that Luke had information available to him that we do not have available today. Luke, time and time again, has been vindicated and proven to be a solid and factual historian. It was thought that Luke was wrong with his reference to Lysanias, the tetrarch of Abilene, in Luke 3:1, but was subsequently vindicated when an inscription was found near Damascus. In Acts 14, Luke says that Paul and Barnabas went to Iconium in Phrygia. It was believed no place existed, but again, a monument found in 1910 proved Luke correct all along. Luke referred to the leaders of Thessalonica as politarchs in Acts 17. It was believed that Luke had simply made up the term until it was confirmed in inscription. There are other cases that could also be cited here. It may well be then that Luke is referring to a time when Quirinius was governor of Syria before the time that we know that he was, and Quirinius was governor of Syria at the time when Jesus was born. However, I must point out that this is an argument based on the silence of the records and inference. It is at best an assumption, even if it may be an educated one. It may well be one shown valid at some point. What I rather mean is that Quirinius, prior to him being officially the governor of Syria in 6 AD, was procurator in Syria around the time of the birth of Jesus, and not actual governor, meaning he held some official position in Syria, but under the authority of the official governor of Syria at the time. Again, we can appeal to the Greek that Luke used in his gospel. The word that Luke used, which is translated as governor, is the Greek hegemonuo, which means govern or command. And this is different than the word that is usually translated as governor. Luke uses the exact same word to reference Pontius Pilate as governor of Judea in Luke 3:1. Pontius Pilate was not the actual governor of Judea, but he was the procurator of Judea under Caesar Tiberius. Luke, it would appear, used the word to refer to the procurator and not the actual governor. Justin Martyr refers to Quirinius as the first procurator in Judea in Justin Martyr's The First Apology, chapter 34. We must also note that there are gaps in the life and the roles of Quirinius, especially around the time of Jesus. Quirinius had many different roles throughout his career, and it is not too much of a stretch to believe that he may have had some governing role in Syria at some point prior to his being governor of Syria. In recent times, there has been a number of inscriptions discovered that may support the claim that Quirinius did have some official office in Syria prior to 6 AD. I emphasize may, as I would not personally assert that these inscriptions do support, let alone prove, that Quirinius did have an office prior to 6 AD. I would say that they, however, are believed by many to do exactly that. I may personally do a more thorough study into these inscriptions one day. As for now, I will merely say that they are used as evidence, and that they are highly debated. Although I certainly would state that history makes no solid affirmation that Quirinius did hold some office in Syria on 2 separate occasions, if Luke was in fact asserting that Quirinius did indeed hold his office in Syria twice, in some capacity, what history has shown us is that it is unwise and actually unfruitful to simply label Luke incorrect. At present we have debatable evidence, but history may yet validate Luke correct, if this is indeed what Luke meant by his reference. As my argument in point 1 is not based on or reliant on point 2 being vindicated, I still believe we have enough information to dismiss the asserted contradiction as nothing more than a misunderstanding of Luke's meaning. Although many will disagree with my assertions in this podcast, I rather think to simply say that there is a contradiction in the Bible and cite the discrepancy between Luke and Matthew without at least having acknowledged that there are ways in which we can reconcile the two is a little bit disingenuous. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. I hope the information has been useful, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.